When I was 20 years old, I was diagnosed with depression after a comprehensive and frankly bulletproof 15-minute checklist appointment with a doctor. I'd never met this person before in my life, but I was bloody well pleased to have my nice label of depression and leave that office with a sense of empowered vitality about my optimistic future of self-healing. I'm joking, that was the opposite feeling compared to what I actually had, which was a feeling of, well, now what? I don't want to be on the pills. I know my mental health isn't the best right now, but apart from the dissertation extension, what can I do with this information? Do I really want to go on the internet and call myself clinically depressed? Or maybe even go further into the medical model and find the way to get the mania and the anxiety in there? Maybe I can get the refinement towards manic depression. Maybe my neurodivergence can be honored, and maybe, secretly, somewhere deep inside my psyche, there's a desire to wear that diagnosis as an excuse for my lack of motivation, my lack of good behavior, and frankly, my unpalatable character traits. Today we're going to be having a grounded, mature, and very difficult conversation about the point in time over the last 10 years when we've gone from the courageous move to talk about our mental health to passing the middle point and ending up in this current territory of self-victimization and wearing our illness as if it were something to be proud of. It's a difficult conversation to have because I cannot make a video like this, even as someone who's gone through this journey and someone who's got multiple years of therapeutically supporting people in private work through their own versions of this journey with depression, anxiety, ADHD, neurodivergence, whatever it might be. There's a whole variety of unique symptomatic labels that we could go into. The key question is, at what point in the last 10 years have we gone from opening up about our mental health to wearing our mental health like a burdensome identity which will bind us to a shallow, pathetic, and frankly self-victimizing life where we don't get to experience the self-healing possibility of moving beyond our sickness. Because it hasn't been this way forever. I've got 5 books beginning with The Myth of Mental Illness by Thomas Satz, all printed in the 1960s and the 1970s, which give an alternative model of the depression, anxiety, or whatever it might be as lifetime diagnosis truth, because scientific truths, although they may be popularized and confirmed with research one way or another, there are actually many different approaches towards sickness and healing, and it's my responsibility in this video to try and identify the moment in about the last 3 or 4 years where it's gone from courageous to cowardly to wear your mental health diagnosis as something other than a temporary guard against instability. Because I'll come back to these books. If I had have won that diagnosis at age 20 of being clinically depressed and took that as my victim card to wave high in the sky, I would have not only accepted the extension on my dissertation, but I was unlikely to probably push myself my dissertation, and I would definitely be unlikely to have that moment a few months later where I knew I needed to heal my mental health. That was what I intended. For 3 years, that was the plan initially. I just turned 21, and I said, no matter what, I need to heal my mental health. I know I can do this, and I relentlessly pursued mental health. I went traveling for 2 years. I was doing volunteering and working on farms and being outdoors, being away from the city, being away from the gossip, being away from all of that stimulus, traveling around Europe, working with animals, working with the land, and building with my hands. Because I knew that my individual mental health was not disconnected from environmental health, and I made the connection as the 21-year-old that I was, that maybe I can heal this. And I bloody well did. It took 2 years in the end, about 2 years until the last moment when I had any kind of possible ideation that I might take my own life, which is something that came through when I was 10 years old for the first time, and continued all the way through my adolescence into my early 20s. I healed myself. I was not given any possible indication towards that even being a possibility by that 15-minute appointment with the doctor, because of course I can't be given that information in a 15-minute appointment with a doctor. The NHS, for all of its benefits and drawbacks, the national healthcare system that we have in the UK, is not known for giving a large amount of time to their patients. Mental health services are stretched thin. But wouldn't it have been wonderful, in that first appointment, as an admittedly vulnerable 20-year-old, to be given even just a pamphlet that this is a temporary diagnosis, and you can fix this, you can heal this. I didn't even know the word healing back then. I just knew that I hated my life and I felt very heavy and I was struggling with some alcohol issues. What if I was given possibility? What if I was given hope? Thankfully, I found it through my self-development-y kind of, I can get out of this kind of mentality, but I wish I had have had some of these books. I wish I had have been given a perspective of self-healing, which was coming through in the 1960s and the 1970s, and then tragically, as pharmaceuticals became more readily available towards the end of the 70s, and especially in the 1980s, these ideas around holistic self-healing, and also spiritual awakening, if you want to go into that territory, were heavily repressed. And now we have a talk therapy and prescription model, which is basically just symptom management and not getting to the core. There are 5 books I'm going to hold up in a moment, which you can read in your own time, but all of them represent an alternative take to the self-diagnosis, wear the identity like your victim badge kind of approach that we have right now. But before we go into the books, I need to make a clear point. I'm not trying to shame anyone. The reason I'm making today's video is because of this question, actually, which I'll bring onto the screen, and this is a moment where someone will go to the comment section and tell me how incredibly disvalidating I'm being, because someone asked me, what is the relation to being an individual and being neurodiverse? A lot of Jung's work is about integrating the shadow, but someone with neurodivergence does not feel the need to become socialized. It's a great question, and initially I wasn't even going to make this video at all. I spent about half an hour planning out a video on antisocial psychology and neurodivergence, until the moment when I was sat at my laptop and I felt a very strong impulse in my heart. I don't think this is true. It might be true. This could be complete projection. Well, it's my channel, so if I'm projecting, then I'm projecting. But I cannot believe, as someone who believes in empowerment, that someone who is neurodiverse feels zero possible need to socially integrate and form social connections. I think it's more likely that they've had a very unfortunate and tragic set of experiences beginning in childhood, moving through into their adult life, where socialization did not come easy and was often very painful. I don't believe that being neurodiverse, because I could wear the label myself that I'm neurodiverse because of the depression in my brain, means that I do not feel the need to become socialized. If I was honest with myself, I avoided socialization back then because I didn't like who I was, and I was so thoroughly shame-based that I did not want to be seen. I didn't want to let my true, wounded, genuinely scarred self be witnessed by other people, so I didn't feel a need to be socialized because of my neurodivergence. Again, I'm not trying to attack or criticize this particular individual, but I'm taking this as an opportunity to have a broader conversation that in a climate of 15-minute diagnoses and a hell of a lot more, 100 times, 200 times, maybe even 500 times more, the instances of people self-diagnosing by Googling or going on YouTube and seeing the top 5 signs of ADHD or the top 10 signs that you're dealing with depression or how to get over manic depressive illness or anxiety, suffering from anxiety, you need to watch this. I'm somewhat of the problem myself in the videos that I make on this channel, but if you've ever watched me before, you know that I clickbait to get you in and then we have a mature conversation that hopefully feels empowering. I can't answer a question with genuine, full conviction about neurodivergence and not being socialized ever as if it were a complete full stop and not challenge the limitation of that narrative. I think it's disempowering, I think it's castrating, and I think it's psychologically numbing to imagine that because you've been given a label, whatever your symptomatic diagnosis might be in, that you can't do something to heal that. Let's go into some of the books that will help you. Again, first book, Thomas Satz, The Myth of Mental Illness, a revolutionary psychologist who really challenged the narratives around sickness and even made some very striking connections towards the criminality and the power imbalance of certain psychiatric institutions. Another book by Dr. Arthur Janov, writing at the same time. We've got The Myth of Mental Illness, followed by The Anatomy of Mental Illness. I repeated the same title because clearly they're quite similar books, and they actually are quite similar books. Two different takes on the same feeling. What do we do when we realize that we are indeed capable of empowering ourselves and healing? Well, we're going to need some humanistic psychology, like Abraham Maslow and the Farther Reaches of Human Nature, or maybe some Viktor Frankl and The Will to Meaning, which is his exploration of logotherapy. Both humanistic psychology and existential psychology provide a deeply meaningful, deeply engaged trumpet call of hope to someone who's suffering. It's the message of believing in yourself and the message of moving through sickness as if it were a temporary storm and not a permanent desolation experience. In fact, if you go deep enough into humanistic psychology, or even into the existential space, you realize that you're struggling with meaning and identity. The core question behind the depressive illness I had when I was 20 wasn't, how depressed am I and what does this mean for my life? It's, who am I and what am I doing with my life? Why do I feel so damn heavy? Why do I not want to do anything? Maybe, this is the spoiler, maybe it's because I've got some things in my past that I have not looked at properly, and some burdens and some weight and some damage that I haven't yet released from my body. That's exactly what it was. And it was a journey of sobriety. I'm currently nearly 5 years sober at the time of recording, a journey of rigorous self-healing, and a journey of reconciling my existential relationship with identity and with God. You need to go all the way up to the upper reaches, which is classically what happens if someone gets a diagnosis like depression or anxiety and they encounter the spiritual world on YouTube. They skip towards the higher end without figuring out the lower end of human potential. So typically they'll end up in often very frightening spiritual emergency spaces. If you bridge the gap in between with humanistic psychology and existential philosophy, you'll hopefully find a reason to live and a reason to be here that goes beyond the symptomatic heaviness and the symptom management, which we keep covering up. And if you are in a particularly deep, dark space, I recommend you read a book like this, which I'm not going to say out loud, but I am going to bring up on the screen just in case YouTube does indeed censor me for this word. S and the Soul by James Hillman, a Jungian psychologist. All of these guys writing in the 1960s and 1970s, an alternative vision of mental health, which we almost saw a resurgence of around the early 2000s, especially leading up to the 2010s, where it became more and more of a, let's talk about our mental health, men, open up about your mental health. But at some point in the last 5 years, that's tipped over towards self-victimization, and this is the real nuance point of the video. It's completely appropriate to enjoy that and to feel relieved by that for a limited period of time. When I was 20 and got diagnosed with depression, not only did I get an immediate benefit, which is a 2 or 3 week extension of my dissertation, which allowed me to finish my degree because I was struggling, it gave me the mental space for a couple of months to finally admit to myself, something's really off here. Thankfully, I had the willpower inside myself to know that I could heal this, and it was a temporary label that I didn't go out and share with other people. I didn't go and hand out my letter to my, all of my lecturers and all of my friends saying, hey, please treat me differently because I'm actually really sensitive and really depressed and I can't handle all this stress. How castrating would that be? Especially for men, especially for young men. Even middle-aged men, to go to the doctor and be given the diagnosis of basically you're broken and there's nothing we can do about it. No wonder people, several years later after getting their diagnosis and going through a variety of pills, often end up taking their own lives. It's because they're not given a vision of hopefulness, but that temporary story, that temporary label that makes you understand when things are chaotic that this is something called anxiety or this is something called ADHD. And this is a cluster of labels that are all put together as a diagnosis, but if I look behind them, Maybe the anxiety relates to the fact that I don't breathe correctly. Maybe the depression relates to the fact that I don't feed myself very well. Maybe I haven't got a fulfilling career. Maybe my body's out of shape. Maybe I still haven't figured out love. Don't let the identity become a permanent trait. It's a temporary band-aid, a temporary, wonderful band-aid that we rip off in the right timing. There are a very small number of people who might be watching this video who really want to defend this identity, but I'd like to imagine if I can show up in public and defend your potential more than you're willing to defend, that's hopefully inspiring. I believe in you so much, and I believe in your potential to go beyond the temporary feeling of anxiety or depression or neurodivergence and become something more powerful, more loving, more creative, more beautiful, more human, healthy, strong, radiant. I find that so much more inspiring because if we were to take 100 people, age 20, and diagnose them with terminal cancer, and 50 of them accept the diagnosis, and maybe 2 of them spontaneously heal, but the other 48, they pass away, and the other half, they have that willpower element of, I'm not going to accept this terminal diagnosis. Maybe half of them still die. That's reality that we live in. But isn't it wonderful that maybe 25 of them, or even just 10 of them, or even just one of those people, because they've thought inside of their mind, and they've felt it in their heart, I am not going to die. I am going to heal this. I am not meant for this. Something happens at a deeper level, something spiritual you might say, and that healing fire comes through. I'm here for that person. It's tragic that many people don't see this possibility. If they're still watching a video like this to this point, know that that's my intention with this video. If it's been triggering at one point or another, I can't apologize, because sometimes we need to be triggered to see a new perspective. I've given 5 books in this video where there are much more qualified professionals than myself who are talking about these issues in depth outside of the mainstream narrative that we're currently trapped in. We go back 50 or 60 years in history and we see new possibilities. It's why the majority of books I recommend on this channel, I've held up over 200 of them, are published before 1980 because there's something about the pre-1980 mental health space which is very organic and very hopeful. It's yet to collapse into this coddling victimization psychology, and I find that just a far more hopeful story than the one that we're being fed right now. And I'd love to see that lever from the courage to open up to the cowardice of wearing the label for too long to actually return back to center, and having men and women who wear the temporary label but know that they can move beyond it because their identity, their soul, their essence is more than a diagnosis, in the same way that it's more than your gender, it's more than your race, it's more than your sexual preferences. The essence of who you are is far deeper and far greater than all of that, and we are trapping people on a very limited narrative which doesn't honor the depths of the human soul. I'll leave it there before I get too angry. If you're interested in these videos, I've got another one over here, and I'll see you over there. Probably less angry over there as well.